So I first encountered Azure DevOps back in 2006. So that's quite some time ago. It wasn't called Azure DevOps back then. It was um, Visual Studio Team Services back in the day. It's gone through many name changes since then, but it's not the same service, but it's the same intent from the service. So Azure DevOps is something that I've been using since then. And I was a lowly software engineer, plugging away, building some products. And Azure DevOps was really my route into DevOps, into helping teams become better at what they do, increase their capabilities, use tools to help them better their capabilities, right? Because Team Foundation Server was intending to be that tool. I think it largely struggled to do anything outside of the Microsoft space until they moved much further on to Azure DevOps, the cloud version. But that early product was actually how I got my Microsoft MVP as well, which was building plugins and playing around with the APIs for TFS. So I worked with a number of teams, some teams at Merrill Lynch, and then some teams at Agreco, and are in both circumstances, while also doing the work, I helped those teams understand how to do automated builds, how to use the work item tracking, how to link all the things together. I built some visualization tools against the APIs. So I've really been plugging away at the Azure DevOps APIs since 2006. So I know where a lot of the bodies are buried in the APIs, which is why when I think what happened, I got my MVP. I moved to the US. I worked as a DevOps consultant, almost exclusively in the Microsoft stack, but as a DevOps consultant in the US for 3 years. So I was doing a lot of Azure DevOps work. We did a lot of API work. There were some migrations. There used to be this old tool that was totally crazy to work with. I'm trying to remember what it was called. Microsoft created it originally, but really it was just a big ass code base, and it allowed you to migrate data from TFS to other TFS, but it had this kind of adapter model so that you could get from other systems into TFS. That was the idea. So I think I'm the only one. I would hedge. I mean, certainly the only one that published creating their own adapter for it. So I did created a migrator for Test Track Pro into TFS back in the day when Test Track Pro was even a thing, and maybe it is still a thing. I've just not heard about it in 15, 20 years. But that experience of creating that adapter really led me when I came back to the UK, started my own business. One of my first gigs was with a company called Schlumberger, and Schlumberger was consolidating. They needed a lot of DevOps help to help make the most out of the tools that they had. They were using the tools really well. It was just a little bit convoluted. So they wanted to take they're the sort of organization where everybody does everything, right? So there's every tool you can think of, every engineering process, they have everything. And they wanted to consolidate down into using at least a single source control tool with work item tracking. And the tool they picked was TFS, Team Foundation Server. So I helped them migrate something, and they had a standard process template. So I helped them migrate something like 400 to 500 teams from what they were doing before into this new model, and then move them from server to server. And originally, I built a bunch of PowerShell scripts. Right, that's when you're prototyping. Scripting languages are the best way to kind of run your thought processes. You're effectively writing down your thought process and then running it and saying, yeah, well, that kind of works. And if I select this bit, that kind of works. And if I do this, that kind of works. So it's a really good way to do some fast, it's incredibly error prone and buggy as heck. But it's a good way to do those things. And I built a bunch of PowerShell tools that I had, I think at one point, 4 or 5 people else in the organization running those PowerShells to start migrating data around, change process templates, move data around in fields, all of those things. And then I started looking at, well, really, this needs to be a little bit more solid. This needs to be a little bit more capable. It needs to be something that's a little bit more pluggable. And I built the first version of the Azure DevOps migration tools. So there's kind of two ways to do migrations in Azure DevOps. One is really limited but really powerful. The other one is mine. The one that's really limited and really powerful is Microsoft's own migration tools. Obviously, they want as many people as possible to move into the cloud. They don't really want to be supporting and maintaining Team Foundation server or Azure DevOps server, the on-prem version of the product. So they want people to move up to the cloud. So they've built a tool that if you get onto almost the latest version of Azure DevOps on-prem, you can effectively package up your database, give it to them. There's a whole process for that, but package up your database. It's not as easy as it sounds. Package up your process, your database, give it to them, and they'll import it into Azure DevOps. So if you're trying to get into Azure DevOps, the easiest, most high fidelity, most productionized way to do that is to have Microsoft do it. They provide a bunch of tools. I've done this for a bunch of customers over the years, tons and tons of customers. The biggest one was the Schlumberger engagement, where I think it was 2.7, 2.8 terabytes was the collection that we moved up to Azure DevOps. It was pretty ginormous. I think they became the third largest customer using Azure DevOps outside of Microsoft in the service. And that was a huge amount of work. But lots of smaller ones are much easier. I did one for a customer where we did it in about an hour. Right, their database was small enough. They're on the latest version. They had control of all the servers, the passwords, all of the things. It was small enough package. We just sequenced it up, and then they looked at the result and went, "Yep, that's good. Let's go with that." And we turned off the on-prem version. So I have personally done a whole bunch of migrations. I have a team that helps with that. We did one recently that was, it's more complicated than it sounds, right? You're not just taking the Azure DevOps database and putting it in the cloud. Microsoft have to process it in. So you have to be on a version that's supported by that process, which is the absolute latest version and one back. So one service pack back, which means that if you're sitting with a local Team Foundation server and you're on TFS 2010, 2000, I don't know, 12, 2015, what else was there? 18. I think there was a 19. Maybe there was a 19. But if you're on a on-prem server, you have to upgrade it first, which means that you might need to upgrade SQL Server. You might need to upgrade the operating system. You might have to do all of those things. So we did one recently for a customer that was TFS 2010. I think they were on 2010, all the way up to Azure DevOps. And there were 3 distinct migrations we had to do, because you've got to upgrade from 2010 to 2015. Then you've got to go from 2015 to, I think you can get to the latest version from 2015 up to the latest version of TFS. Then you have to run and validate all of the things that you need to do to go to the cloud. Then you can take your environment into the cloud, and that can go one of 2 ways. You can just take the database if it's small enough, it's under 150 meg. You can just give them the database DAC pack and it'll work. But otherwise, you have to set up an Azure environment. You have to install the data, the SQL Server, upload the data, and then get Microsoft to do stuff with it. So that is the easiest, simplest, and most productionized route. But it's not what a lot of people can or want to do. Lots of companies have lots of circumstances that are out with the bounds of that. They've got 100 teams and only 5 teams want to go to the cloud. They've got other teams that can't, won't, whatever reason. That then adds complexity to that mix. They've got teams that want to go just now and other teams that want to go later. Those are the most common ones for that push up into we're going to ADO. But also you've got companies that sell products, right? So if you've got 5 products in your company and one of those products is being sold, it's probably inside of the same TFS or Azure DevOps, and you want to move that piece over to somewhere else because you're selling it to somebody and they're going to take the history and all of the stuff that goes along with it. And Microsoft provide no support for any of those scenarios. So if I've got 50 projects and I want one. I've got projects across 5 collections and I want one collection, one account org. I've got, I don't know, I created one big massive project and I really should have created 2 projects. These are things that are just not fundamentally supported by the tool or in any productionized way by Microsoft. So what my tool that I created does is it allows you to migrate pieces of your whole thing to another location. So we do a query based, so it's predominantly focused on work items, although there's lots of other tools in there. And it's like a Swiss Army knife, and the people are adding new tools all the time. But the main, I don't know, the knife part, the main tool that you use, or is it the scissors, right? Because that's the main tool you use on a Swiss Army knife. But anyway, whatever the main tool is work item migration, because that's the thing that's just not out there. So you're basically saying, here's a query. I want these work items and I want them recreated over here. And the tool goes and recreates them. So there's lots of limitations, lots of caveats, lots of things around that. But that's effectively the idea. So I quite often get asked to help customers in a variety of different ways. Sometimes they want to do the migration. If they've got loads of migrations to do, I've got people out there that have been using my tools for years. And it makes sense if you're going to use the tools, like big enterprise customers find quite often they need to move data from one place to another. They want to consolidate, they want to split. So they spin up a group of people, probably the administrators of Azure DevOps for their company, that they want to spin up on the tool and use the tool. So I provide them with a bunch of support. Sometimes it's just support calls. Sometimes it's training. They want to train some people on using the tool. But more often than not, with lots of organizations, it's a one-off thing, right? We're going here. We want this to happen and we just want it to happen. We don't want to we don't need that skill in-house. If it's not your core business, you're not doing it all the time, and you don't need it to support your core business, then that's when you outsource, right? And I did a big migration recently of about 80,000 work items for a customer that wanted an audit trail, right? So they've bought another company. They've not got their hands on all of that company's stuff yet. There's still all the legal stuff that has to happen in between, but they want a copy of all the work items and all the code so that their then audit department can then go through all of that and validate and check and match things up. And yes, this is the right thing, and all this is missing and that's missing. All this, I don't know what they're doing, right? But they wanted that copy. So they don't want to mess around having their own people learn a tool and then do it. So we just did it for them. Probably took 8 or 9 days to migrate, actual 24 hours running on it to migrate that number of work items, because it's a lot. But then after it's done, they have that copy in a new location and they can do their own thing with it. So sometimes we do the migrations, sometimes we help support the migrations, sometimes we help train people, and sometimes we just consult. I quite often get calls from folks that just need some advice on how to do something in Azure DevOps. These big infrastructure ideas that people have, the business decides they want to consolidate stuff, they want to split stuff, they want to move stuff around. Like, what does that mean for us? What are our options? What are our capabilities? So I quite often have discussions with customers on how that all goes together. And sometimes they use my services to help them, and sometimes they have enough information to go do it on their own, or it's easy enough that it's just following the docs from Microsoft. So as both a user of Azure DevOps, which I have been for many years, although not so much anymore, right? I do a lot of my work in GitHub now, but as a user of Azure DevOps, I really appreciate the capabilities that it has, but then there are some gaps that you need somebody to fill. And sometimes you want to spin it up yourself, and sometimes you need to kind of get somebody in to help you out. So that's kind of my experience with Azure DevOps.